Okay, so as promised, you're going to get a weekly video that is going to be a little bit more in-depth about how to make sure that we get the best transformations possible. The way I've structured it is I've tried to do it in sort of a good order in theory of what you're going to really experience across this 12 weeks. Now, I'm really excited to do this one because it's one of the sort of overlooked parts of getting in shape with when people just generally do it in day-to-day life, that I think if you really do take this in and watch it, it can really help you a lot. So this is all about the habit loop and the sort of what happens when we have bad habits, and just so you understand where you can see your bad habits and then how you can look to break it or form new good habits. So I'm going to have a series of bits of paper that have some information on it, and then I'm going to explain it basically. So hopefully it's going to make sense. So you've got 4 stages of a habit, be it good or bad. So you've got one is the cue, the craving, the response, and the reward. Okay, so every time I'm going to go into detail of what these different stages are, but every time it could be the simplest thing to the most complicated thing that you may not even realise. You go through these 4 stages, and then often they can repeat. So the main thing with a habit, be it good or bad, is it has 2 things that it's doing. So it's going to either satisfy or it's going to teach you. Okay, a very, very simple one, which you all do and you all have the exact same habit, is, say for example, when you're heading into a dark room, which would be a cue, you need light, you need to see, so there's a craving for that light. Again, it's, you know, the wording is obviously may not sound like it's right, but it is right. So you crave for light because you need to see, and that is the response. And then the reward is switching that light on so you can see. So it sounds really daft, but it's a habit loop that every time you go to a dark room, you switch the light on, and the reward is that you get to see. So that's what you do, all of you, every day. Now you can also apply this then to some bad habits and other things in your life which you may be able to break down yourself. But what we'll do first is go into each of the 4 parts into a little bit more detail. So the first one is the cue. So a cue initiates a behaviour that you either pick up for the first time, or it's something that you've done regularly over a long time, again, be it good or bad. And the cue would normally predict some form of a reward. So again, in the light instance, the cue of going into the dark room, your brains are very clever in the sense that they're always seeking reward in some way. So because they see that dark room, they know that if they switch the light on after you've done it at least once, then you'll get a reward from it. So then it's predicting that it's a good idea to go through the other stages to get that reward from that cue of seeing the dark room. And where you then seek that reward from a cue, again 1 and 4, the stage and the process goes on to the next bit from a cue, which goes on to the craving. So all it is you noticing, what's going to happen basically. And the noticing is then the craving. So a craving is, you'll have a craving and it's a motivational force for you to do something about it. So the cue highlighted it in a sense. The craving is there, so it's going to make, it's going along the route of making you want to do it. So it's not the actual habit, but it's the change in your state. So often it can be that personal reward is a good feeling. So if you have a good feeling about a habit, be it good or bad, then it's already recognising that if you do this, then it's going to give you that better feeling about yourself, or internally or externally. So for example, bad food is one. So there could be, we'll go through that in detail how I could help break that down, but you've already had the cue, and then the cravings for the bad food, and then from the past you may have had that bad food, and that may have given you the response to eat it and the reward feeling, that good feeling. You might have a sugar rush if it was high and sugary, or if it was that really dirty food that you really wanted, then obviously you feel rewarded from it. So it's that wanting of what you've got in your head from the cue. So after the cue and the craving, your brain then thinks, right, I need to respond to this, I need to do something. Now that is the actual habit, and it has to be something that gives you there can't be too much friction or a barrier against it for you to do it. So for example, let me try and think. If, let's say for example, the light one, that's a very easy one. So you've done the cue, you've done the craving, the response is to switch the light on. Now if that light was 10 feet high, then it's highly unlikely that you're going to do it. So therefore you would end up stopping at the response because you think, well, I can't get up 10 feet high. Whereas as the light is within arm's reach, then it's kind of got no barriers, no friction for you to achieve that response to get that reward. So then you're going to do it. Again, it's imagine, if you had, a pit full of lions to jump across to get the reward. Depending on how you see that as a risk or not, would be whether you would actually action that and jump across the pit of lions. Again, that's a very extreme one, but it gives you an idea. So this is the obtaining it, basically. So the response has to be at a motivation level that you are willing to do it. Because then if you're willing to do it, then you're going to do it at the end of the day to get the reward, which is number 4. So it's the end goal of the habit. So basically this is where you've then rewarded your brain and the feelings and the emotional state that basically makes you feel either better about yourself or you perceived to feel better about yourself. So the purpose of it is twofold. So like we said at the beginning, is either to satisfy or teach. So if it's to satisfy, it's going to satisfy the craving. If it's going to teach you, then it's going to be a case of, say you start a new bad habit, but you go through the 4 processes and you get to the reward, and then what it does is it's a really good reward in a sense. It wasn't, you didn't miscalculate or you didn't get it wrong. So then what it does is it teaches you to remember it. So therefore then when it comes back to the same cue that got you to here, then every time you hit that cue, you're going to almost go through the full process to get that reward again. So it's taught you to basically remember it and keep doing it every time. So again, that's why habits become routines, because you've done them many times and then they just become autonomous. You don't even have to think about it. Now, that then puts us into a loop. So that's what's called the habit loop. So you get your cue, you get your craving, you get a response, you get a reward, and then often you'll go back to the cue and around and around and around. Okay, so whenever you get that same cue, it starts the process every time. Now, those 4 parts of the habit process can be broken down into 2 separate elements. Okay, so you've got the problem is the cue and the craving, and the solution is the response and the reward. Now, the problem, it's called a problem. That's what initiates change. So from whatever your current emotional or overall state is, that cue then starts the ball rolling for the craving, and that's the change that is apparent. The only way this change can be apparent is if you do the solution, which is the response, so switching on the light switch. But again, the reward isn't good enough to risk your neck climbing 10 feet high if the light switch was up high. So that's the action, okay? Now, let's put it into context when it comes to your dieting, okay? Now, you probably can't read this, but if you can follow along, but I'm going to explain it. So remember, 1 was the cue. So let's pretend you're at work, and then when you go out for lunch, maybe you either walk past a shop, petrol station, or maybe the smell of something from a shop. So that instant there has then either in the past or is going to create a cue that makes you think of the food. So let's pretend, I don't know, when you go past the shop, it smells of donuts, for example. Every time you walk past that shop every day now, you're going to get the same cue that, oh, it smells of donuts, or it normally smells of donuts. That's your cue, okay? So then that cue is reminded you about donuts, and then you're going to then crave donuts, because actually your mind, if you've had them in the past, or if you can always happen upon a habit without even trying, but once it's happened once and it gave you a reward, then at the end of the day it will just keep that loop going, and it will do the cue and do the craving, do the response and reward. So let's say you've done that donut, these are one of the bad habits, and therefore you remembered that donut tasted great, and the reward was you got that little bit of a boost of sugar and that flavour of sugar in your mouth, so that was your reward. So the response in this situation is that when you get to that shop or get near that shop on your lunch break or you're out of the office, you go and buy it and you eat it. That is the response. So you physically had to walk into that shop and you had to physically buy it. Now again, if you if it was almost hard to get to that donut to buy it, then you'd weigh up the whole, is it worth the effort and would I do it? Whereas, so if it's very easy and it's a hyper palatable food like a donut or a sugary thing like that, then that's where it's very easy to make bad habits like that. And then every time you go down the street or on your lunch break, you might go buy a donut. So the reward is you're satisfied by eating it, like we said. So the buying is then associated with your office. So basically, like I said, that then creates the regular occurrence that is then that. That gives you a very, quick one. So you might be able to think about your daily routines, things that you do all the time, that when do you pass or do things to the point where it then gets you to buy bad food or eat bad food or do something like that, or an emotional state or a feeling. That can then be broken down, that you can probably work out then the cue, the craving, the response and the reward. Now, how to change, how to make good new habits. So this is where you've been given a diet plan and everything else. Now, let's say you would have thought, I'm going to do a 12-week transformation myself. Now, obviously, your cue may have been, it's New Year. Everyone often has that on their cue. And then you would then, sorry, 2 seconds. I'm going to pause that right there because my timer is going off for my food. So I'm going to be back in 2. Okay, back again. So yeah, just had to get my food out of the oven. I didn't want it to burn. It's pretty important. So, how to make a new habit. Sorry, carrying on. Ignore that like 20 seconds. So, the cue. You need to make the cue obvious. So, if you need to put in a new good habit, the cue needs to be very obvious and very easy to make you actually get that response constantly. Okay, then you've got the craving. The craving has to be attractive. Again, this is why it's so much harder to eat good wholesome food, because it isn't as attractive as bad food more often than not. But then it's the overall state that comes with what happens if you do eat really good food is what you've got to remind yourself about. That's the attractive part. So, for example, the cue could be, at New Year you want to get in shape, or cue could have been you had someone say a horrible thing about your weight. Any of these different cues would be the trigger almost that says, right, I'm going to make a change. The craving then needs to be, has to be appealing. So you could say, right, I want to get in shape, but again, if there's not a really good reason for that craving to happen that you're going to get in shape, then at the end of the day, it's not going to really bother you. Whereas, say, for example, that said person is still very much in your life that gave you the original cue, the craving is to, obviously, you're craving to prove them all wrong, to say, fuck you, basically, I'm going to do this, I'm going to get in the best shape of my life, and I'm going to keep doing this by obviously eating this good food, which is going to contribute to me getting in the best shape of my life, so fuck you. Now, you've got to make it easy. So when it comes to various habits of eating well, how are we going to make various habits of eating well easy? Again, we have a routine of making our food or food prepping in bulk, or at times that make it easy, so then we are less likely to fall down. If we don't do any food prep, then often it's very easy to not make good choices when you're out hungry, or you go past old cues that could take you off track. Then you've got to make it satisfying. So I always remember, especially when it comes to getting in shape and needing to just be a little bit tighter on your nutrition, I always think of the end goal over what the short term is. So I think, for example, when I went out with my friends on the weekend, my cue, seeing my friends on the weekend, would be, the craving would be to have a beer with them. So it's social inclusion, and just obviously it's the weekend, and that's when I'd see them. My cue would be they always have beers. My mates love a beer. The response would be to buy that beer, and then the reward would be that social inclusion and the taste of beer. Now, if I change this, because obviously I'm highly motivated at the moment, I'm on the same boat as you, I can change that habit initially, and then I can be in more control and power of my own destiny because obviously I'm more motivated. So my cue of seeing my mates and then being at the pub I'm now creating a more obvious one, that before I go, I've obviously planned out my day, planned out my food, planned out my dinner for when I get back. I've already said that I'm only going to have a couple of Diet Cokes. So then my craving is actually going along the lines of, well, let's think about, I want to look better in 12 weeks. So my craving is now, because I'm highly motivated, I've got a lot of intrinsic internal motivation, I'm then going to crave my result more than I crave that beer now. So therefore then my response when I get to the pub is to then buy a Diet Coke rather than a beer, and my reward is actually a positive outcome because I feel then empowered, because of then, rather than slipping into an old habit in a very similar scenario, my reward is that I've actually trumped that and I've been, positive and strong enough to say no to the beer and just have the Diet Coke, which keeps me then on track. And then the feeling of staying on track makes me feel even more empowered and even more positive. And then all I can then think about is my results that I'm going to get in 12 weeks, rather than the result that I'm going to feel a little bit of a reward short term now. It isn't going to give me that reward in 12 weeks time. So obviously that's my creating a new habit based around an old habit. You could go completely new, and again, like we said on the food front, so again your cue could be Sunday night. Sunday night would normally be get a takeaway or whatever, but your cue Sunday night could therefore then be food prep. You make your dinner nice and healthy, but at the same time your cue is Sunday night to make your food, so your craving again is to get in the best shape of your life. So that's what's driving it, because then the reward from that is going to be the best shape of your life. The response is to then do your food. So if you physically do cook it, again, if you've got all the ingredients in, you know what you got to do. So the fact that you've all got diet plans make that response and makes the motivation to do it a lot higher. Then you can then obviously get the reward by being fully food prepped for the week ahead, and therefore then you feel really good and positive, and then you're another week closer to your goal, which is 12 weeks to the best shape. Hopefully that makes sense. So that's talking about new or aligning along an original bad habit and changing for a new. But how could we, if we have a bad habit that isn't going to be changed for a new good habit or aligned with another one, then how do we completely break a bad one? Now, so if you have a bad habit currently, so let's say I don't feel I had the willpower, if I, for example, I didn't feel I had the willpower to go to the pub with my friends and have that Diet Coke, so I knew as soon as I went to the pub, I would have, caved, for example. So then I want to, just temporarily, I'll say to my mates, I say, look, I was like, I'm looking to do this for my health. I'm looking to do it because I want to be in better shape. At the end of the day, down the line, I'll be back to drinking beers. But right now, it doesn't suit my goals right now. Either support me or don't. It's up to you. Now, I know this is often very hard to do that, but that is going to be the biggest first step you can do to be able to break a bad habit if it's going to affect your overall process to your goal. So therefore, then, you've made it invisible by saying, look, I'm just not going to go for beers with any of you on the weekend. Like, obviously, I'm happy to see you. Maybe we can go for a walk in the daytime, or you can come over my house, stuff like that, whatever, if you want to chill. But that is where you're making the pub, in a sense, invisible because you're not going to go to it. It's only temporary because your goals are more important to you right now than they are going to the pub just for this one weekend. I mean, we live a long time. 12 weeks out of the year to not go to the pub is not the end of the world. So you're trying to make that bad habit invisible by effectively removing yourself from that situation. Now, you've then got to make it unattractive. So again, you've got to think, why else would I not want to go right now? It's like, okay, after Christmas, I haven't got a lot of money. If I go to the pub and spend 100 quid for easy, then that's unattractive because then I don't have that 100 quid. It's also going to make me still feel crap about myself because I'm not going to be able to control myself. And then I'm going to go over my obviously calorie goal and I'm not going to succeed in this challenge. So you just remind yourself of why that isn't going to help you. So you're trying to make that whole craving for that original bad habit more and more unattractive. So the more unattractive you can make it, the more likely you're going to completely avoid it, and then that bad habit is going to be out the window. So then you make it difficult. So again, so you've already said to your friends, okay, I'm not going to be going. So you've kind of told them that you're not going. So that's part one of making it difficult for yourself to go. You can also say to your other half, sort of, for example, if I end up chatting to anyone on the phone, just literally get in my ear and just say, like, you need me to do stuff, whatever. So then it makes it difficult for my mates to pressurise me to go to the pub. Again, you're trying to do anything you can to make that it difficult for you to do that response. You could go to even further extremes. So for example, if it was on your way past, if it was on your way home, taking a different route, you know, leaving earlier or later at work, so then it actually affects the ability to go there. Or I don't know, aside from that you would be you know, give your other half your keys so you can't drive to the pub, for example, go meet them. Anything, again, this is very, very individual for that part, but you're just trying to make it as difficult as possible to carry on with that bad habit. Now, the reward is, if you're making it that unsatisfying to the point where that you can actually achieve not doing it, then your reward is slightly achieved in the sense that you're going to carry on with what you do want to achieve. Whereas if it's a bad habit and it's got nothing to do with anything else, then again, if it's unsatisfying, then it's not going to reward you. So then if it's not as satisfying as it was before, then you're not going to get that same response from your brain to want to reward yourself to go do it. So therefore, why would you still do it? So now I've tried to put that into as much context as possible. What you can always do is have a real think about your daily routines, what you do regularly, where you can potentially go wrong or find it harder. If you're not sure how to break down those 4 stages that I just spoke about, then you can always message me a bit about the situation, and then I can help you break it down to understand, well, what is the cue, what is the craving, what's the response, and what's the reward, and then how could we break that by making it obviously unappealing, unsatisfying, difficult to the point where you actually don't do that bad habit if it's going to take you away from what we're trying to achieve in 12 weeks. Then when it comes to achieving new ones, again, you've just got to think, make a cue. So again, make it very obvious. So again, post-it notes on cupboards or fridges and stuff like that. Doing your shop and being organised on that. There's various different things that can just ensure your food prep is there. Same with the exercise portion. So again, if your cue could be on a Sunday night is get your gym bag ready for Monday morning. Put your gym bag in your car. Once you then start getting that as a habit and a routine, then again, if it's in your car, it's going to make it less difficult to give up the gym. And regardless of, you know, if you go to work afterwards, if you finish work late or you finish work and then you're going to go afterwards, then you've got everything there to just go straight there. Whereas if you had to go home and then you potentially sit down, it's going to be very easy to not do that new good habit of going to the gym. So various things like this will just help to make sure that you get it ingrained into your routine, and then you've just got to repeat until it becomes a point where your body really does see it and your mind sees it as a reward, and then you see the results from it, which is what obviously we're going to get from this 12 weeks, and then it should stay ingrained. So this isn't just a 12-week fad, it's actually a lifestyle and a change for life potentially, where you can see the different good and bad rewards from different habits, but make an educated decision as to whether you want to do it or not, and have the willpower and strength to do it. Hope that makes sense. Ignore that 20 seconds in the middle where I did my food, and hopefully if you've watched this all this far, you should actually get a lot out of this, and hopefully it will help you be on the road to continue to succeed in this 12 weeks. Any questions, fire them down below, and I'll speak to you soon.